Hello, welcome to our video series on core versus more. Over to you, Brittany.
Hi everyone! Today we're going to be doing core versus more with our returns. Now you might say to me, how much more can there be to a return? Well, we know returns can be a little messy sometimes. So we're going to be comparing our POP return versus our RTV, which is inside of field service. If you say to me, Brittany, I've never heard of field service. Well, field service is available if you own GP Extended. If you're unsure if you own this, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to help you find it out. So let's start out with that POP return. You might say to me, oh, Brittany, I hate doing returns. Well, let's learn a little bit about those returns to help us out here. I'm going to start out in that POP returns entry. And first things first is that POP type. We see that we have those 4 types. If you've done a couple POP returns before, we kind of know we have 4, and sometimes they get confusing as to what they do, what they don't do. So let's talk about what their intended purposes are for both, or for all 4, sorry. Let's actually subdivide those into 2 groups. Our first 2 being the return and return with credit. What does that mean to us? Well, the return with credit means that I can't have had anything that altered that particular inventory layer. You say, that's great. What does that mean? Well, that means that when I issued out that PO and I received that POP receipt inside my warehouse, I can't have had that inventory move at all. It means I can't have sold it and returned it. I can't move it to another warehouse. I can't change its bin. It cannot move. Okay. And then, of course, we have the difference between what's the difference between a return and a return with credit. A plain old return just deals with my inventory, says I need to return this inventory, take it out of my stock, put it back to my vendor, and we're good to go. The second part to this is my return with credit. It does 2 transactions in one. I know it sounds like a bad infomercial, right? 2 transactions in one, but it does. It does our inventory return, gets it out of our stock. And of course, the credit part says we're going to set up that AP credit so that we can apply to invoices or future invoices. Okay. You say, that's great, Brittany. What if I've moved that inventory around? This is where we get into our second group, being the inventory and inventory with credit. If your POP receipt has come in, you've received it, and it's had any movement. So let's say we've changed warehouses, we've sold it and returned it, we changed its bin, whatever the case may be, you're going to fall into that second category of inventory or inventory with credit. Same thing again. If we do an inventory, it's just dealing with that inventory, getting it out of our stock, putting it back to our vendor. Okay. The inventory with credit is that 2 transactions in one. It sets up our AP credit and of course deals with our inventory. I'm going to do a return with credit today. Okay. So first thing it wants to do is create a return number. Great. Next is that vendor doc number, which is usually an RMA number we get from the vendor. Okay. Date. Of course, what vendor are we talking about? Now comes these interesting boxes you may have seen on the header, but weren't quite sure what they did. This replaced with return goods is an interesting checkbox to have. So let's say you received some inventory to your back door. It came broken. You called up your vendor and said, hey, listen, I got broken inventory. Can you please replace it? Great. GP has this checkbox here to say, if you check this off, it says, we're going to reopen up that PO line once you process this return because I'm expecting to receive that again instead of you setting up a whole new PO. Okay, so you always have that option for you as well. Now you may notice my secondary option here is grayed out for my invoice expected for return goods. This actually only works when I do a straight old return or an inventory return. This is if I am going to be sending back some stock that the vendor is going to invoice me for it. So it allows that invoice match to be opened up for us to actually be invoiced for it. Okay. So let's go ahead and select our PO number here. Of course, because I picked a return with credit, I'm going to have to say which receipt number it's talking about, because if you remember, that POP receipt cannot be altered. Okay. So I'm going to say here, I have my receipt number. I'm returning 5 for my 15 bucks. That's great. Of course, GP is now expecting you to automatically put this in a box, put in your returns transaction entry, and ship it out. Now, that's all well and good. I've also set up the credit here as well. So you'll see here, this is going to be the credit that's going to be set up onto my vendor for my 75 bucks. Of course, I can add anything additional here, like my taxes, freight, discounts, any of that great stuff we can put inside of here. Okay. Now, we can also add some information inside here as well. Of course, like any of the other screens we're used to seeing inside GP, we can do that drop down, bring it up, see some additional information, put it in there. Okay, so here is our pop return. Now you say to me, what happens if my pop return is my return is a little bit more messy, as in I need to issue out an RMA, wait for some information, and go from there? Well, this is where we're going to start talking about RTVs. I'm just going to go ahead here and hop out of my returns transaction, and we're going to go over to our field service RTV. We're going to go explore what the differences is from the pop receipt into our RTV. So RTV is inside of our field service. Field service has a whole host of things inside of it. Now, if you joined me last month, you would have seen me do the RMA. And we're going to do the RTV this time. You'll notice there's a host of other things in here, being our service, contract, preventative maintenance, depot maintenance. Field service has an abundance to offer. But we're going to be focusing on the RTV entry update today for our return to vendor. This is if your return is a little bit messy or maybe a little bit complicated when we're doing those return to vendors. Now let's start one from scratch and see what our options are. So I'm going to go ahead and hit new here. Now, you'll notice I have this RTV type. Now, you might say, I heard you say 4 different types before. We're going to talk about 4 different types for our RTV. You'll notice we actually have what we call this return path. This return path says a lot of information about a return. We can have as many different return types as you want. You can have one for each line of business. You can make as many as you need to inside of field service, but they have to have a return path. This return path designates what's going to happen and what transactions are associated with this RTV. So the first one I have is the credit. It straight up deals with my inventory, takes it out, puts a credit onto my vendor account. All good. My next one I have is what we call this replacement. What's going to happen is I'm going to ship out an item. I'm expecting to have it replaced. This is more like an exchange. Okay. Then we have this advanced cross ship. Well, now we're getting into the real messy. This is what's going to happen if the vendor sends me one and then I'm going to wait until I receive it and then I'm going to return it back to the vendor, or maybe we're going to both send at the same time because we don't have time to wait for all of that. The last one I have is repair and return. It is exactly the way it sounds. I'm going to send it to my vendor, say, please repair my broken item. They might bill me for some additional labor, and then we're going to turn it back to me. In today's example, we're actually going to be talking about inside here is our credit one. This is our second type where we're going to have that credit done to us. Now you'll notice I also have an RTV status. And this is a little different than that pop receipt where I can have multiple statuses and multiple stages to my return. Okay, so I don't just enter it all in, post it, and it deals with it all at once. It's going to do this for me all together. I'm going to have that RTV status happening. Okay, so I can have a step-by-step of return. Of course, like my other return, what vendor am I talking about? Okay, so now let's talk about the line itself. In RTVs, the majority of my information actually resides inside that line. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this line. So you're going to see I have a lot more information here that I can put out here. So first things first, what site am I taking this stock out of? Okay. And what item number. Now you might have noticed I have an out item and an in item. You might say to me, Brittany, why do I have 2 different kinds? Well, if you've ever had the situation where your vendor gave you the wrong item, so you received one thing in, but you said, that's not what I ordered, give me something else, you could be having another item sent to you in its replacement. Or maybe the vendor just doesn't have the item that you're returning to give it back to you. So you could have a different item come in. Of course, how many of them am I returning? Nice and simple there. Now, for a little bit of difference, I have that vendor RMA number. So we have that separate, we can track that where we say, now my vendor RMA number is X. What shipping address am I sending it to? And any additional reference numbers I need to have inside of here. Okay. Now, you'll also see I have this cost section here. If you remember, I had that previous part for the path where I said I could have a repair and return. This is where I can add in those additional costs in there, like parts, labor, travel, all that good stuff. And if your next question is, if I have this item repaired and returned, does it take those expenses and put them part of my cost of goods sold when I sell this? The answer to that is hard yes. It does include it into our cost of goods sold, so it accumulates those additional expenses we have in there. Say, great, this looks like my regular return. Not quite. So now I've started my return. It's in the status of I've entered that RTV. Well, maybe I'm entered it, but I don't have my RMA number from the vendor yet. I'm just making that request. I can come in here, save this RTV, and come back to it at a later time once I get that RTV number from my vendor to say, we're good to return it. I can update that RMA number. Now comes that secondary step we were talking about. So I'm going to hop out of this window and I'm going to show you that secondary step. Because just like in real life, the secondary step to this is my shipping. I'm going to go into my RTV shipping window. This is exactly the way it sounds. I actually need to ship out that RTV. So I'm going to go ahead and mark and post that RTV and let it go ahead and post. Now, what it's going to do for me is it's actually going to do an inventory adjustment. It's going to take that inventory out of my stock for me, and it's going to print out that information for me. So I'm going to go ahead and let this print out for me. So the first part, it tells me this is our typical posting journals inside of GP. What document, what item, how much is it for, and it's leaving my warehouse. The second part to it is my RTV packing slip. I can have a packing slip that I put into the box. It says my RTV number. It says my vendor's RMA number. It says what I've put in here. And of course, if you're using lot and serial numbers or one or the other, that information can be put on here and it is fully compliant with lot and serial numbers if you're using them. Just to let you know, because field service is fully integrated in GP, it uses all of those core transactions we're used to seeing. Okay, so as I just said, it's created that inventory adjustment on the back end for me. You say, great. Now what happens to my RTV? Excellent question. My RTV now says that it's been entered and let's go ahead and ship another one here for us. So I say it's ready to ship. I can mark all my lines ready to ship. We're going to save this. And of course, you can ship as many or as little as you want. So if you notice, I actually now have 2 lines in my RTV because I said I've now gone in and marked 2 RTVs because maybe we have a particular day for returns. I can go ahead and mark and post as many as I want to in one day. I'm going to go ahead and post these. I'm going to do 2 returns at once. And you're going to see that it's going to give me my 2 posting journals and of course, 2 packing slips as well. And my cost variance. So let's go ahead and print our posting journal and our packing slips so that we can go ahead and put them in the box. Great. Here's my first return. And here is my packing slip number for us as well. Okay. So I'm going to be putting those in there. There's my secondary audit trail. Now we can come back into our RTV entry window. Go and take a look at our RTV here. You'll notice it's actually moved to a different status. If you didn't notice that from the lookup window, It's now moved in from status 10 to status 30, which is my received RTV. I've actually gone out and shipped it. You say, well, does that matter? Yes, it does, because now it's actually linked a credit. If you remember, when we said in the path, it does a couple different transactions for us. Well, now in this return path in the link, it shows us all transactions that are associated to it. I can go ahead and hit that credit voucher and see that it has indeed created that payables credit for us that we can go ahead and put against any outstanding invoices or future outstanding invoices. Great. Now I have done that separate RTV shipping. Well, you might not actually want to close out this RTV until you get that notification, maybe from your delivery service or maybe even just from your vendor itself. We're going to leave this open. We can leave this open until we get that notification from whoever we're waiting to receive it from. Now we have the last step of RTV closing. You'll notice that I can now go ahead and close that RTV by marking it and posting it, saying that I'm good to go for all this. We've gone ahead and closed this RTV. Now, you might say to me, Brittany, I see a lot of options here. What's happening? Well, if you remember, we had those multiple paths. We've done one of the simpler paths today being just the credit. Well, of course, if you're going to do a replacement, you're going to turn it in from a 3-step to a 4-step where we issue out our RTV, get that RMA, of course, ship that part out in my RTV shipping. I'm also going to be doing an RTV receiving, which means I'm expecting to have that returned product received back to me. It's going to receive it back through RTV. Okay. And then my last being the RTV closing. Now, as I said before, you can have as many RTV types as you need to, depending on how complex your return needs are. Now, if you have any questions or you want to do a further deep dive on RTVs or whether or not you have field service, how to enable it, please feel free to reach out to us. We love a good return. Come on over, come chat with us. We're happy to help you in the return process. Or maybe if you would like to combine the RMA and RTV process that we've covered last month and this month, we're happy to help you out with that. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. I hope to hear from you. Over to you, Scott.
Brittany, for those that are new to Endeavour and GP Support North, 3 lines of business: advisory services, implementations, and ongoing upgrades and support. You can reach out to Trish to find out more about what version of GP you're on and if you have extended pack. Otherwise, you can also find us online at www.gpsupportnorth.com. Thank you.